It's the morning star drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly, so let's realign. Just listen if you're...
Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to the MSD on 117.8. It's Tuesday, January 14th, on this penultimate day of giving glory to God, and we are so excited to start this Tuesday together on the MSD with Bible Today and with 2G Talks. I see we have some involvement and engagement from last week's segment, and we're happy to elaborate more on the retreat. And I think we actually just had our wrap-up meeting this previous weekend, meeting together with the AP second generation team. And it was a great time, even the wrap-up too, right? Because I think after everything, you need a time of wrapping up. And I think even in line with this week's message about being perfect this year, and something telling us that this is a message that is crucial for this year. Right. And, I think some of you may know, but here in American Providence, Pastor Sky's been, going around. And I'm not in one of the churches that he's visited this time. But, to each of the churches, as they're sending reports, right, they're having communication with something. So he kind of gave insight onto the responses that something has been giving. And it's really all in line with this, right? Explaining what 2025 is, why it's a time to be perfect and how it must be perfect, what last year really was, and, how it's different now. And so I think it was such a crucial message and a crucial time. And I think it was helpful for even thinking about this second generation retreat too. And so I'm thankful to Ray. Shout out to Ray. And I'm not sure who this is from the tagline, but I know there's another person in the comments below who asked about what happened at the retreat and stuff. And it was a really great time, but we did need time to kind of simmer and to reflect on it. And for me, I'm always thinking about what's the next step. And I think that's just how I'm always am. And that's not always the best thing, right? Sometimes you need time to kind of reflect on the past and be in the moment and in the present. But I'm always thinking about, okay, what do we do next kind of thing. And so after the retreat, my biggest thing, even while we were planning towards the end, was thinking about, okay, one of the things that something said was about educating the second generation. So we were working on a program for lecturing the second gen and me specifically the SS. And so that's what I was thinking on as soon as the retreat was over. And as we were brainstorming, we had different ideas, but I think this week's message was perfect for how we should be thinking about it actually in more detail, right? It was and this came up in one of our meetings too, right? I feel same with newcomers, with lives too, and people within our departments. I think we always expend a lot of energy actually on the people who necessarily aren't doing well, right? On the what seems to be the weakest link, right? And I think this message about focus on those who are doing well, and entrust those who've left to God. And, of course, give them the word, but allow them to resolve their answer, resolve the problems of their life through the word on their own. That was very pivotal, right? Because I think all of us can relate to this too, right? If we can't resolve our problems with the word, then you are not fulfilling, right, what the point of this history is and the example that something has set. Right? Something himself is someone who resolved his own problems with this word. And one of the things that he said in the long past, even related to soccer, when he gave a sermon about soccer, was that I didn't come so that only I would receive this strength from God, right? But each of us, each of you can receive the strength from God, so receive it, right? There's no reason that you aren't able to do this, right? And so he didn't come for himself. He didn't come just to show us this dazzling figure of a being, but he came so that we would have that example and we would have the word in order to resolve our lives' questions and our problems. And so yeah, I think it really made a lot of sense, and it kind of pivoted what we did. Because I'll give an example, right? For the SS department here in the U.S., for so long, we're always trying to get all the kids involved, right? And I think and at a time it really made sense because during COVID, like I think that kids were really hit hard. I mean, everyone was, but like like I can see it even now in the people who are going through like elementary school to high school and who went through college in COVID. Right? For those of us who graduated well before then, we might not like remember or even think about what that's like, but they're kind of going through this period and they're still kind of recovering in some sense from that life, from those few years where they were in that state, right? And I think like mentally and across the world spiritually too, people were really affected by it, right? So at that time it made sense to try to gather all of them and take care of them because the whole world was not doing well, especially in this age group. But now in 2025 we really have to help those who are doing well. And a thought came to mind for this, and so this will be kind of like the wrap up for the introduction portion, and then I'll share some parts about the retreat as people have said in the comments, as well as the Q&R panel kind of things. But the last part for this introduction, and this is something that the message really made me think of, was like in high school, I had the same teacher for my like AP US history class, right, which is like the advanced placement like history class. And I had him again for my government class, which was like the AP US history one. It was kind of like only for those who are doing really well, right? And people who want to do academically really well and they're willing to push themselves. Whereas government is a class required for everyone. And I'll say like for most of like my, for most of high school and middle school, I always tried to be part of the more like academically challenged like group. But government is something that we all have to take, right? And I think when you're in this group of forward-seeking people, you're naturally always in a smaller group. Right? Like not everyone is in that group, right? And so like it's the same thing like with Providence as with this class or with these like advanced placement classes. It's a much smaller group. And I think I only realized it like towards my junior or my senior year that it was a very small group. Because it dawned on me pretty late into the year that I'm seeing the same faces over and over again in my classes, even though we were a really big high school. Right? So even though our class was really big, the number of people that I interact with was pretty small, right? Because I'm seeing the same faces over and over and over again. And so like it was only when I had this government class with the same teacher that I got to interact with a lot of other people from my grade who I didn't really see for like 3-4 years. Right? Like I might see them during lunch break or like during after school programs and things like that, but I never saw them in my classroom until I took this like required course for everybody. And I think initially I was really shocked by like the difference between the two classes, but it made so much sense. And like in terms of this message too, I think it kind of relates as well, right? In terms of being perfect, in terms of like evangelizing those, who are big fish. Like when we look at them, like we know that, you won't have to take care of these people. And I'm sure like we know who these lives are, right? Like, and I don't mean that in terms of like, as soon as you talk to them, you know who they are, but you know what qualities will like make it so that you'll be dragged along and have to take care of everything and have to wipe up their butts for them every single day versus like people who can be self-sufficient in Providence history. And of course we have to do our job of checking and things like that too. But like when we look at the lives now, those who are running now, you can trace back to how they were. Right. And maybe, yeah. And something that accounts for this in the message, like maybe in the beginning, you do have to take care of them and like and help them to resolve their problems. But eventually to make it in Providence history, they have to stand on their own 2 feet and take care of themselves too. But going back to this story about high school with this teacher, because I really liked this teacher actually. Like, he was funny in kind of like a dry humor kind of way. Right. He wasn't trying to be excessively funny, but he just had like it wasn't a dark humor, but it was just like a dry wit, right? And I loved it. But in our like AP US history class, because all the kids are like relatively well behaved, right? So there's not much he had to do, right? All he did was assign the work and go over it, and we were able to excel and like push forward. And even though he didn't spell everything out for us, like we took action independently, right? So that was our AP US history class. And I realized, and so there's kind of like a side story related to this. And I think Rachel can attest to this, and I've spoken to like other people with her like around regarding the subject. But because she's a teacher, right? And I think for people who are sermon deliverers or who have presided or something, or like have just looked in front of the congregation, you can see everything. Right, like the sermon deliverer sees everything, right? And they can't see everything in terms of like what you're thinking, but they can see everything in terms of your expressions and like your eyelids closing, right? If you're falling asleep, stuff like that, your head nodding, they can see every single thing. And same thing with a teacher in a classroom, or like with our teacher too. Like when he's in front of us, like he sees all of these things, right? And he sees what's apparent before him. And so in that way, it hit me one day, right? Because I used to sit right in front of this teacher. And so I used to sit next to one of my really good friends, but we would be seated right in front of where the teacher sits in that classroom. And so we would be like talking about a lot of things because our teacher really didn't like engage with us except for like the course material. And so we're like, my friend and I would be talking about movies, we'd be talking about our other friends, we'd be talking about like dumb, like stupid, like 17-year-old conversations, right? And like one day it hit me that he was listening to everything that we were saying, because we started talking about this Korean movie, and it's like really, really gory and just terrible. There's like so many bad things in it, and it's probably something a teenager should not watch, but it was really, really bad. And I think our teacher, like he's like a Caucasian man, right? Like just a classic American white guy, and he like apparently he saw the movie too. And so as we like mentioned the movie title, he was like, "You guys watched that? That's like so like graphic and gory." And it wasn't like the way what he said like that shocked me at all. It was just the fact that was like the first time I was aware that he was listening to our conversation, right? And so I was like, wow, like he sees everything. And so like in that class, I realized in that moment, and I thought about this much later, like years later, that wow, even though he saw everything, he just kind of let certain things go, right? And like as like a human being, like you kind of pick and choose your battles, right? If he engaged with every single stupid conversation that the students are having, you would be kind of worn out and worn thin. And so even though he probably hears and sees all these things, he doesn't engage with it. And the other thing with this advanced placement class is he knows that these are relatively good kids who, want to do well. And so he knows how to operate with them. And so the flip side of the story was when I took government, it was just stark difference. Because the one thing I remember him doing at the very beginning of class on the very first day was he talked us through his cell phone policy in class, right? And this was the exact same teacher that I had for U.S. history, and it was the exact same classroom. But I didn't remember at all him having a cell phone policy in our AP U.S. history class, right? He didn't need to do that, right? And then I realized, wow, like, okay, so this is a different class. And it didn't dawn on me at the time. I was just kind of like, oh, like, this is kind of different. Right, he was like, yeah, no cell phones in class. Don't do this in class, like and stuff like that. He just set some ground rules, which he did not have for the AP class. And so I was really like surprised and shocked by this. But it dawned on me like that this is what the difference is, right? And so I think a lot of times we expend a lot of energy on the government class, right, on this bottom layer. But, when we're doing that, we're doing what the teacher was doing, like when he heard my conversation with my friend about this movie, right? He was engaging in this. But not just that, we engage with every single thing, right? When we like kind of deal with, problems within our churches and within our department or for a newcomer, we try to handle every single thing, when actually, right, those who are doing well, right, like as the message said, right, the kingdom of God is like a net, right, that was let down, and like you catch good fish and bad fish in a basket, right, and you have to keep the good fish and let the bad fish go, right, and if it's something too small, you let it out again till you allow it to grow. And so I think it was really like just a very great message, right, because we were thinking in the context of like, okay, what's next for the SS, and what's next for the second generation, and what's next for all of us, right? And for ourselves personally, right? It's not just looking at the lives that we're taking care of or our missions or the people we're in charge of, but looking at ourselves. How do we become, perfect in this time? And that was addressed in this week's message, right? And so that's just kind of the opening. And so we'll go into the first break, and I'll talk a little bit about the retreat. And if anyone has any other questions and thoughts and things they want to do together, I'm more than happy to work on it together. I'm thankful to all the folks in the comments, and I'm sure everyone, other people have different thoughts too. And so please feel free to share, and let's make a more ideal history in that regard together. So let's go into the first music break for today.
Both here and there, so many places to go. After thinking deeply, I decide to follow the Holy Spirit. I followed her everywhere now, here and there around. When she acts on her divine will in the right order at the right time, it's beautiful. It is truly deep, profound. While taking action, going around diligently, I completed everything. I got it done, all before the sun had set. Throwing away all my own thoughts. Throwing away all my own thoughts. I must follow only the Spirit. Then I'll do in proper order the work I must do.
Awesome. Hope everyone enjoyed that break, right? It's one of the newest songs that were translated into English. And so I kind of wanted to just give first like a broad overview of the retreat, and maybe focus specifically on the Q&R portion, since that was what the comments was asking about too. But yeah, on the broad overview, it was like a 4-day, 3-night retreat. And it took place in Georgia. And, I mentioned that specifically because it's a very unique location that we're able to have it. Like in the past, we've had many retreats, but they're typically like in places that we rent out or borrow. But here, we have like a church building. and we have a lot of land available to us. And so in both, like, the fact that it was like over a 4-day period, and that we were able to do certain things, I think it was because we had this location, right? Because we've had other locations, and typically, right, because we're paying by the day, our retreats are a little bit shorter, like a day shorter. And I think that does impact, right, how the retreat can go. And so because it was like an extra day, a lot of the people commented that like they felt that they really got a lot out of this retreat, and they feel like they did everything that they wanted to. So that was like one thing, right? So we had it at a place where, we own the land. Of course, a part of it was like in other places throughout Georgia, but it was like mainly in this place where like we own the church. And so the first day, right, everyone was arriving, and we kind of had a time to get to know one another and to play games and stuff like that. And that was a good time too. And like people had a fun time, right? So, but a lot of that was very physical. But part of what we did throughout this getting to know each other and playing games time is we also showed a portion of some of Sonsang님's past tours to American Providence. And that was really good. Like we didn't get to view a lot of it, but like even the parts that people saw, I think they had a good time with. And so we tried to like keep it spiritual and do these things at the same time too. So we had that the very first day. It was kind of like a welcome day for everybody. And Friday was our first substantive day. And on this Friday, like we went up to this stone mountain, right? It's like literally like a big mountain made out of one huge rock. And so we went there after the pre-dawn to like, see the sunrise. Right, and we set condition there. We sang some praise songs. And that was really nice to see too. And I think it's good, right? Because I think in a public setting, a lot of these kids probably aren't used to singing praise out loud. And I'll be honest, like we went to that same mountain 2 days before, and there were a lot more people that day, and we were singing praise songs that day too. And even for myself, right, that's not necessarily a setting that I'm used to. And so I'm kind of glad actually that the Georgia members, led off with that, right? And then after that, we made our way over to the church, right? And like while we were there, we had our first major lecture. And during that time, like they had like a small, I think it was almost a preview of the Q&R session, but it was actually a lot of the responses coming from them. And so Pastor Grace, like one of the people who actually helps us to translate the message, right? And you may have heard her during the interpretations, which is something I mentioned last week too, right? She led them through some questions, right? Like, what are some of the problems you see in Providence or in your family, stuff like that. And I didn't get to join for a lot of this segment, but it seemed like the kids had a lot of substantive discussions. And there is Rachel's mom has been helping me to teach one of the female newcomers here. And, and we've been working together in this sense. And it's been really amazing. So we've been working together in this sense. And we recently taught the newcomer predestination. And I think it's a very important lesson, right? But I think with predestination and with lessons like Central Figure or John the Baptist and things like that, as a second gen, sometimes those aren't like the biggest questions for us growing up, right? Because we haven't lived life in the world like without these core like doctrinal things. And so these oftentimes these core doctrinal things are not the issue, and oftentimes it's like the much less significant things that are the big issues. But I think Rachel kind of encapsulated it best in our conversation, and she said that yes, honestly, the biggest thing for second generation is the family harmonious, right? Is our families doing well? Like that's always the biggest thing. If that part is taken care of, and that encompasses a lot of things, right? It of course encompasses like our family's spiritual faith and stuff like that, but it's all of the things, right? Are we doing financially well? Are our parents do they treat each other well? Do they love each other in some sense, and do we see it, right? Do they interact with the church members well? Do they raise me and my siblings well? And all of these kinds of things, like that's what I think is like one of the biggest things for second generation. And honestly, that's probably a big thing for everybody, right? Not just for second gen, but like more so than predestination predestination? Is it absolute? Is it relative? Do we have free will? Things like that. Oftentimes the biggest question is like, yeah, like, are we, living up to that promise that God has for us? So, Pastor Grace kind of led the kids through these questions, and they came up with their answers, and I think that was a big part too, because there's a difference between hearing someone tell you what it is versus you kind of saying it with your own lips. And they had to think about it, right? Because they're presenting their answers. So that was a big part. And then after that, Rachel, planned this like very extensive what's it called? Escape room, right? Which included a scavenger hunt. And it was great, right? I was actually blown away by how well it was made and how fun it was too. And I actually think I had more fun watching the kids struggle than they had. And so shout out to Rachel. Like, it's funny because like in some of the feedback we got, some of them didn't like it. But I think that's a good thing, right? Because some things you don't like right away, but like you only realize you like it with time. And sometimes that liking it isn't even like, oh my gosh, I love this, like this is so great. And sometimes it's just like it becomes a part of you. And I do feel like it was very involved, the escape room, and I do feel like it'll become a part of these kids, right? It's like I can't think of another example. Maybe because it's the MSD, I think of coffee, right? Because of Pastor Sky, it's like only Peace Guy maybe is like, oh, I love coffee, right? But for a lot of people, it's like it becomes a part of their life, right? And they can't exist without it, right? And so even though when you first have it, it tastes bitter and it tastes terrible and you don't like it, like the more you drink it, like you grow to appreciate it. And so I think it was one of those things. And I think actually one of the lectures got some negative reviews too, but it's like those things are the things that become a part of who they are, right? And so like we had this part, and the parents were like, they were cooking like literally 24/7, making amazing meals for us. And so that part was taken care of, and we had amazing lunches and dinners throughout this process. And then because it's the time of giving glory, that night we had the time of giving glory, and we sang songs, and we had an amazing praise night too. And then Saturday, after waking up in the pre-dawn and having some free time, the first thing that we had was a subsequent lecture, this one that I gave. And then afterwards, we had a Q&A or Q&R panel, which we mentioned last time, where the second generation team, which consisted of like our AP admin rep and Pastor Grace, Rachel, and myself, we sat down and we had like a panel discussion, right? And like when the idea first came, I hated it. Like I was like, man, do we gotta do this? Because for my school, I had to like sit through like a number of these kind of panel discussions, and I was so like I did not like it. Like after a while, because I just did it so many times. But I had to think back on the first time I did it, and the first time it was helpful. And maybe it's also what I just said about, something that you might not like initially, but you like it because it becomes a part of you kind of thing. Like I honestly have thought back on some of the answers that the school panels like kind of gave me, and it was useful. Right, I think about like how it was done, and so I was like, okay, fine, like let's do it. And I think part of what we discussed was that like we had some mock questions and some example questions, and we kind of gave the kids like 3 days before the retreat to submit questions, and all up until the night before to submit any questions they had. And only one person really submitted them, and the questions they submitted were like the really hard-hitting ones, like the things that Pastor Sky has kind of talked about on this podcast too, with the things that happened in 2023 with KJS and other things like that, and also about kind of things that I guess Ray might be getting at with the apologetics, right? Like things that kind of like maybe are like not necessarily doctrinal, but like things we believe in, how to reason it out and how to make sense of it, like things like LGBTQ and stuff like that, because the kids are a lot more like influenced by these things, and it's a lot more present in their lives than I think at other points in the recent few generations of history. And so they asked those kind of questions. And during this Q&R panel, I think we went through 4 questions, and we had like maybe 10 fake, not fake questions, the questions that we put into the pool. But 3 out of the 4 that we picked were from that person, right? The deeper hitting questions. So we went through it. And so that was this is kind of the bulk of things. And then we had another field day, and the field day was really fun too. And then another time of giving glory at the end of the night. And then we had a bonfire and praise time, and then Sunday service the subsequent day. So it was a really, really great time. And I think even the members who were there who were not second generation, they had a good time, like Pastor Sky and all the other AP leaders as well. So it was really an amazing time. And so I guess, not to make this long, and I'm more than happy to talk about other things for those who are interested and curious. But I wanted to kind of get to what Ray was talking about with the apologetics, and I think it's an amazing idea, right? And I've definitely thought of something similar to that, many times, right? And yeah, it's definitely necessary, right? Something did tell us to write books, and I'm sure this kind of the reasoned arguments that you see in apologetics are things that he would want us to discuss too. And I'm sure there's things that we're going to have to do together with him and get checked, right? Because he's also talked about in the messages how there were people who wrote books, and initially, right, he green lit it because it was for Providence for them. But they kept writing in a direction that wasn't helpful for Providence and wasn't what the Trinity wanted. And even when something told them that, they continued to do things on their own, right? So everything is something that we have to do together with the Lord, right? And I know we have writers in Providence too who are writing their own works and things like that as well. And I think that's great. That's fine, right? If they want to accomplish and write their own books and stuff too. And I've had my own aspirations and dreams about that too. But one of the things that came to mind is that, we write not just for ourselves and not just for our own glory or for to write a bestseller of our own accord, but to write on behalf of this history, right? Right? Just like the apostles, right? After Christ, they wrote not for their own glory, but to help Providence history at that time. And so I think that's something that, that I'm sure that everyone's already keeping in mind. But as we go forward on this journey that we start off with. And as a last note for that, I don't like being pessimistic, but I think, a careful consideration, right? Because this week's message was about being perfect, right? And so careful consideration of the topic, knowing ahead of time, is important as well, right? And so one of the things that came to mind related to this was this Q&R thing. It wasn't a new idea. Right? It came up before because these kids have had these questions for at least a few years. And we were always hesitant to do it. And I've heard in other countries in Korea that they did it as well in different fashions. And it wasn't altogether that useful, right? It's not about the Q&R. I'll give an example, right? In Korea, I think because even Korean kids were getting more question, or they were having more questions about LGBTQ, someone did a lecture on that stuff, and it was kind of graphic. They went into detail, right? And I think they even taught this during a retreat in Wonmyeongdong or something. And that person something told them don't do this, don't teach them these things. Instead, teach them the word, right? The things that they need to know, right? And so I think it's the way you do it, how you do it. So even during this Q&R, we did have kind of similar to apologetics, and I think Rachel specifically had a good answer to the LGBTQ kind of things. But for myself, it's always not something that I hesitated on, but I was okay, if we're gonna do this, let's do this wisely. And right, because sometimes the questions that are being asked aren't even the questions. And tying it back to the very beginning about this week's message about being perfect and focusing on those who can make it, right? Who will put the word into practice for themselves. When those people and the AP class, right, the AP US history class is on our mind, then what we're trying to produce becomes much more high level. And I would say it's a much better product But when we start trying to scoop up everyone, like all the bad fish, all the little squid, the baby squid, in with everything else, we start having to get into so many different things, to answer so many complicated and unnecessary questions that actually those people need to resolve. Like, not even that question. Honestly, for a lot of times when people are asking those kinds of things, they have so many other things to resolve, right? Like within themselves, right? So that needs to be addressed, right? And like we, as God said, to entrust that to God and to have them solve it within their own lives before coming back, before going to the natural temple, like with their, sicknesses, but not just physical sicknesses, sicknesses of the heart and of the spirit and of the mind before. So those are just my thoughts. But yeah, in terms of these different projects that we have, the apologetics, right? Like, I do feel like 2025 is a new time. And, Providence does definitely need these kinds of things as well. And so I am like more than enthusiastic and happy about like going into these things too. And, sometimes asking basic not even like the complicated stuff, but even the basic questions. Like, I've had SS teachers before ask me questions that were like pretty basic, and they like apologized about it. But I was like, no, it's good, because I don't think I've actually like unpacked this in like a very reasoned way before. And so yeah, like asking questions is useful. And so like I have no idea what specifically with Ray or whoever else commented, what specifically may be spurring you on for this, but I would love to see what it is that God is inspiring and moving each of us to do, like with regards to all of these things. So those are just some reflections from this week's message, as well as from the retreats and all of these kinds of things. So yeah, if there's anything, please feel free to reach out. I'm so happy that you guys brought this to our attention. And I think Rachel, Pastor Sky, and I were actually talking about aligning on some of these things because they came up in last week's segment. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And so with this, we'll go into the second music break for today, and then I will hand it off to Rachel with 2G Talks.
The truth shines forevermore. Every day I lived my life loving the Lord. We fulfilled rapture through love. I'll live with Him forever. God fulfilled His great purpose for the earth. This new history, this is where hope and joy shine so bright. I will live here in Providence, serving the Spirit and the Son, always loving them. Now this history is my home. Since our love is eternal, I will live here evermore. His great purpose for the earth. Welcome back, everyone, to 2G Talks. Rachel here. 2G Talks is the segment I hope to create a narrative and conversation around Second Gen's experience in Providence, while also discussing other topics related to Second Gen, all centered only on the Lord. For today's 2G Talks, we have a more extensive and in-depth review on the Second Gen retreat, as well as a Second Gen's thoughts on the January 9th verdict, as well as a special guest joining us today. Yes, welcome back. I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. It feels like it's been such a long time since I've talked to you guys. I'm sure it's also been a very tumultuous week for everyone following the verdict that was given on officially January 9th, which I do want to talk about and address, which I mentioned in my intro. But before I do that, first, I wanted to start off on a more hopeful and positive topic, because I think that's what the Holy Trinity and our Lord would want us to do, right? During this time of difficulty. I don't think they would want us to struggle. I don't think they would want us to be in despair, but I really think that they would want us to really focus, to really center ourselves only on the Lord once again, while also supporting our brothers and sisters in faith. Which, speaking of our fellow brothers and sisters in faith, have y'all listened to Sam Raymer's testimony? Pastor Sky interviewed Sam yesterday for his Monday podcast, and I really think I listened to it with my mom, who I think he does name drop, but it was just so inspiring to hear a member, and more importantly for me, a Second Gen, because, personally I can relate to him more, I think, on that level. But seeing someone just be so open and honest and just raw. Personally, I've had a couple of people tell me, Rachel, I don't know how you share the things or you talk about the things that you have in your segment, how you're just so honest, because they couldn't do those things or they couldn't talk about that. And to be completely truthful with you guys, sometimes I don't want to either. Or it's hard for me to do as well. As you know, as Eddie wonderfully outed me, I didn't even really want to do 2G Talks in the first place, because I thought I had the misconception that nobody was going to care, no one would really listen. But I have come to realize and see that it's not really about me, right? Anyone could be here using the segment of 2G Talks as a platform to speak about their life, right? But I realized this platform, MSD, everyone here, all of the members that are testifying and using this channel, we're all here so that we can be used and allow God to work through us, to have God work through us, so that, yes, we can share our testimonies, our life experiences, the joys, the sufferings, all for the glory of the Holy Trinity. And even more so than that, so that we can help those around us to love the Holy Trinity even more. Because, right, the first commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? To really love each other, to really help each other. And for me personally, I realized what pride is there in front of the Lord, in front of the Holy Trinity. So, yeah, I think it's good to be so completely honest and open and kind of raw. And I see that within Sam's testimony as well. So if you haven't already, please feel free, pause this video, go back to Monday's podcast, the 13th, and listen to it, because I'm sure that you'll see yourself in a lot of the things that Sam says, and I'm sure that you'll gain even more hope and gain even more strength from his testimony. So yes, please check it out. Please leave a comment for Sam so that we can support each other in that way too on MSD. Next thing I wanted to talk about, I happened to check the comment section of our last podcast that we did on January 7th, 2025. Oh my gosh, so crazy. And I did see a few comments and questions that I thought were really good and that I wanted to answer and address regarding the retreat that we had for the Second Gen. I did send these to Eddie too, so he may have already talked about these things in his segment. But the questions I want to talk about were posed by our listener, KSS31677, asking what events happened during the retreat. And I did do my best to kind of cover them really quickly in the last episode. I like to think we did our best to try and cover both physical and spiritual aspects of the retreat. I do think Eddie did a really good job testifying last week about how he prepared and the things that he did so that he could deliver the lecture for the second gen in a really incredible and powerful and moving way, right? And so personally, I can only share the things that I worked on or was in charge of. So my insight and what I'm going to share about is going to be just about the escape room and field day really quickly. So both of these things obviously are not really spiritual at first glance. But I wanted to focus, because, second gen, we don't always want them to do spiritual things. It can get kind of boring to them or just repetitive. And so I wanted to take this initiative and try to do these more quote-unquote physical activities with them, but implementing a spiritual touch to it. So, for example, looking at my escape room, it was my first time ever making an escape room. I didn't know how it was going to go. There were some bumps along the way. I remember Eddie asked me at one point, well, Rachel, what are you going to do if it doesn't go your way? Are you going to be able to adapt and be flexible? And honestly, I couldn't give him an answer at the time because in my head it was no. But when it came down to it, even though there were some bumps and things that I had to fix or kind of think of on the spot, we were able to get through it. And I think overall the kids had a really good time. I shouldn't say kids because our range was really from... Well, we did have very, very young children and babies all the way up to late 20s. So I'll call them kids, but that's the range we had for the second gen who came. So for the escape room, we had about 30 second gen playing. We had staff members on the side also helping to kind of delegate and regulate the second gen. Because although it says room, it's not really a room that they were in. They kind of were allowed to go all over the church land because we were doing this in the Athens church. So there was the church that they started in, the sanctuary, and then they were allowed to go into the field that's right there, and there's even a forest kind of line that they were able to go in and explore and see different things. So we started in the escape room. There was a cipher they had to complete. After the cipher, they were able to go outside to do one of the scavenger hunts that we had. So we had a bunch of eggs that were strewn about throughout the fields and in the forest a little bit. And within the eggs, there were questions, and they had to answer those questions to then eventually unscramble certain key highlighted words to make a proper sentence. Pretty good idea, I thought. It was really interesting. There were 7 teams, 2 girl teams, 5 boy teams. And looking at it, I wasn't there with all the teams because I was kind of everywhere at once, checking in on everyone. But hearing from the guardian angels, it was super interesting because how girls and guys work and just how they think is really different. Of course, each gender has their own personalities within those things, right? But on average, it was so funny. The girls were usually able to finish the puzzles far more efficiently and quickly. They were always the first ones. There was 2 girl groups and they always finished first on all the puzzles. It was really interesting. And one girl would say something, all the other girls would listen and then kind of add on to that thought process or kind of expand on that thought process. And I did talk to a couple other guardian angels and regarding the guys, and the guys seemed to struggle a little bit more with the puzzles, and it could have been for a couple of different reasons. Perhaps, I didn't write the clues well enough or the hints or whatnot, but what they were saying is they noticed that the second gen guys one person would say something, they would hear it, but then they wouldn't expand on it, or they wouldn't work together. They were all trying to individually work on their own to reach the goal or to solve the puzzle. And so because of that, it took them a lot longer, and it was a lot more difficult because they weren't working as harmoniously as the girls would. Which, I don't know, who's to say? But it was also really interesting because, like I said, during the second puzzle, during the scavenger hunt, you had to go and find your team's eggs. I didn't think of this, but I'm very grateful we had this opportunity and experience, because now I know if given the opportunity, teams, especially the boys, will sabotage each other. So you had some teams, some boys, they would grab other teams' eggs. They'd see, oh, it's not my egg. And instead of just placing it back, they would actually purposefully hide it in an even more difficult and ridiculous spot. There was even a second generation who came to me after and was like, Rachel, I'm so sorry. I found another team's egg and I just threw it down a hole in the forest. Why? Don't know. I told him that it was okay, that, he let his intrusive thoughts win. But I personally never would have done that. But it's just showing, again, the differences in mentality and just kind of perhaps the competitiveness that was there as well. They want to finish before the other teams. They don't want to be last. So it was very eye-opening to see how men and women are very different in their own thinking, and especially when you have to work in a group of people that maybe you don't know that well. How does it work? So yeah, that was really interesting. That was one of the main examples and things I want to talk about during the escape room. At the very end, though, all the teams were able to finish. They were able to open the chest that I had at the very end together, and we all got ice cream. So I was really happy. Some people did complain about the escape room, but it was different. I don't think it's ever been done before in Providence, and I did make it pretty much from scratch with the help from some people. So who knows? I'm hoping to do another escape room, but maybe in the future. We also had a field day, which I think was really fun. Well, it was fun for me because I got to tell everyone what to do. And I don't know if people are aware or knew I was a teacher, and so maybe they thought, who is this girl just telling us what to do? But it was my teacher coming out. I'm very good at giving instructions and expectations and things like that. But it was kind of cold at that point when we were doing the field day. This was on Saturday. So same thing. We had 7 teams, 2 girl teams, 5 guy teams. And it was really also funny to see them all doing the field day. Very physical activities. We pulled a lot of different types of activities, some elimination process, some where they had to work together to go across the field, either holding a ball in between their heads and kicking another ball with their feet. There was one of my favorite ones, which was like a Simon Says, but I called it Sansonym Says. And we lined them up, and they were facing another person opposite of their team. And there was a water bottle in between them, and I would call out like head, shoulder, knees, toes, and I'd keep calling that out, saying that in different orders until eventually I'd say water, and then they would have to lunge for the water bottle, and whoever got it would win. So there were games like that I thought were really fun and really challenging. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to make it challenging for them to really push themselves into, if it's too easy, then it's not fun. I did get feedback on the field day though, so if anyone here was at the retreat, a second gen, or even a staff member, and you haven't already filled out that form, please do so. I would love to make the next retreat even better, because we are going to start planning for the next one. We're really adamant on making that a consistent thing, hopefully once a year. I'm saying that without full knowledge of what the other second gen leaders think, but I would like it to be once every other year. So yeah, so that was kind of just an overview of the things I covered, the escape room and the field day. And I think, like I said, Eddie did a good job talking about what the lecture was like that he gave, how he prepared it. And it was the same for the other lecture that was given. The second question that we got was, were there any newcomers? Well, when we're thinking about second gen, I think the definition of newcomer is a little bit different. Normally newcomers are people that have never heard the word, they're just learning the word. But when we talk about second gen, it's essentially, we do have second gen newcomers. These are the kids who aren't coming around to service anymore, not really involving themselves in Providence. I don't know every second gen's personal situation or level of faith, obviously, but I do believe we actually did have one or two second gen quote unquote newcomers who joined us during the retreat, which I was very happy and I think was great. We even had a couple babies who came, which was so cute and really refreshing. Honestly, I'm not really a baby person. I don't think I've even held a baby, like, actually. But the Holy Spirit really softened my heart when I saw these kids. And so I had a really good time with even the babies as well. We are going to be working on and creating a highlights reel video about the retreat so that we can show everyone what the retreat was like, and maybe even include a couple of interviews or audio files within this highlights reel video. So please look forward to seeing that. I think that is a far better experience than just hearing me talk about it, because, you know, when I tell y'all that, it can only go so far. So I do look forward to y'all being able to see it so that you can kind of almost experience the second gen retreat yourself. So yeah. If you have any other questions about the second gen retreat, please feel free to leave a comment or even direct message me. I'd love to talk about the second retreat even more. Or if you're planning on starting retreats with your own departments or your own country, please feel free to reach out as well. Now, for our very last segment, I mentioned this in my intro. Like I said, I want to share, my thoughts on the verdict that came out on January 9th, because I do think it's important to address it. But, I do want to preface this in saying that I'm not going to really I don't really care to talk about the actual process of the trial itself, because that's a whole other can of worms, right? I'm not qualified to talk about that. I don't know the full story, so I shouldn't give my opinion on those things. I don't feel the need to say anything. And since I'm also said to not talk about it, so I want to respect that as well. But I did want to share my heart and my immediate reaction and thoughts from hearing the verdict as brides for this history. Because I imagine in 50 years, 100 years, I want people to really know. And I imagine that maybe they'll think, what were people going through? How did they react to this? When the man of mission went through this, how were people then able to overcome? And I want to testify in this way because I imagine in the future they are going to also experience a wide range of difficulties and problems. And so if y'all can gain some strength from me, from us, when we went through the most difficult times with the man of mission, then I hope that those future issues are going to be things that y'all will be able to overcome far more easily with greater understanding, wisdom, and grace. So, a little background of the story is that, yes, we received news of the verdict on the Supreme Court trial right after the Sunday service, actually. I was able to hear it on January 8th, 2025. And at this point, there were still a few of us after the service to hear the news. And of course, there was a lot of emotions that I felt after hearing it initially. I was really disappointed and kind of regretful. And obviously, definitely, I did not want this to happen. I really hoped and I really wanted Sunset to be released. 17 years, that's... I can't even comprehend. But also, I'm somebody who I like to say is a realist, which can mean sometimes negative. But looking at the state of the world, and especially Korea, the corruptness of the government itself, right? 3 presidents in a couple of days, martial law, the corruptness of the justice system in Korea. I mean, all these things kind of painted a picture for me so that although I did pray and really want Sansanim his freedom, there was almost this nagging feeling in my heart. I couldn't help but have it that unfortunately Sansan would have to suffer for us again. Which is actually kind of crazy because in the Sunday message for this week, right, titled Be Perfect, Sansan did say the fate of the one sent, it's been decided. It's a different path that he has to take from ours. And that the one sent, he suffers, and he will suffer for our sakes. So when I heard about the verdict, there was another member with me, a really good friend of mine, who, as soon as she heard the verdict, she kind of choked out the words that she felt like she had been shot or stabbed in her heart from hearing the news. And then immediately she just started sobbing, just crying. And of course, all of us who was there, we did our best to comfort her. And after that, we went our separate ways. We all went home, right? But I felt the need that I needed to reach out to her after the fact. So actually, this is my audio recording that I sent to her regarding my thoughts on the verdict. I thought it would just be, rather than me retelling what I had said, I want to be because Sam inspired me, Sam Reimer, I want to be as raw and open and honest as possible. So this is my audio recording on the night of January 8th, right after hearing about the verdict. Hey, hope you're doing okay. Yeah, I just wanted to send this voice memo to you about the trial. Honestly, I kind of knew that his trial or the amount of years that he was given wasn't going to change. I was just really hoping that he wouldn't have years added, and maybe, if anything, years taken off. And I don't know why I thought that. Maybe I just am a negative person, but looking at myself, I knew that I didn't do anything great enough to warrant Sunset being able to come out. And I could say that for a lot of people. So I think partly the reason is, myself and others and just the world as a whole, or Korea as a center, if you want to look at it like that. But even though I blame myself and others, the great thing and the most amazing thing I think is Sunsetum doesn't blame anyone. He doesn't blame the girls, nothing. He doesn't blame anyone. He really does something that only someone with God could do. Just to love people. Truly love somebody who, like you said, when you heard it, felt like someone shot you. I'm sure Sunsum felt the same way. Sunsum, he loves them. He loves the people that shot him. And so, for me, it's another reminder and push to love in the same way that Sunsetum does. Because I realized a little while ago, and maybe you have realized this too, that to really love something or someone, it can be really painful. Love can be really painful. Because if you don't love something, then you don't care for it, and so whatever they do, it doesn't really matter. It's like, whatever, I don't care. It's not going to affect you. It's easy to just not feel anything. But when you really, really love something, any little thing that happens, or big thing in this instance, is really going to hurt. So, good. I say, not that it was a good thing that you cried, but, you really love Sunset. And I know that he can feel that and that he knows that. And we're already running to take action, preparing for the booths and all that stuff, so just know that Sunset is the happiest. Not just being out of prison or, out of the suffering that he's in. Because, if you remember the Sunday message, he talked about, he asked God why he's in there still and why does he have to suffer, and God told him there's a will. So Sunset follows what God does, so he'll do the will. But all he needs from us is to love and to take action. And to do it together, harmonious. And I imagine one day we'll be able to tell Sunset that I evangelized all these people, and they all believe in God, and they believe that Jesus came back in spirit, and they believe that fire is the word, and they believe that Jesus resurrected in spirit, and they believe that Jesus came on people that are the clouds, and they believe, I want to be able to tell Sunset all those things, and I think that would make Sunset the happiest. More than being free. So let's do that together, yeah? Anyways, just wanted to check in. Sorry for the long voice memo. I hope you sleep okay, pray a lot, and have a good night. So yes, in response to my audio, she did agree with a lot of the things that I said, and the thing was, yes, we were really sad and really heartbroken, but we both became truly strengthened and realized once again how much it is that we need to run for this history, that we need to preach the gospel and the truth. And if you don't know this member, this is actually Caterin from Houston, who is by far one of the sweetest people I've ever met. And personally, I think one of the biggest hearts that I've ever seen. She also happens to be a really talented writer. She has her own blog that she's been using to testify for this history and how it's affected her day-to-day life. And for the first 15 days of giving glory to God, she actually wrote a poem specifically after hearing the news of the verdict. And she did share it with us on Sunday at church. And after hearing it, I thought that it was just so fitting and that it was so beautiful. And so I asked Kat, because she has such a way with words and testifying, I asked if she would be willing to share here again with us. So yes, this is my special guest. Please welcome her as she recites her poem for us once again at this time.
When I was in high school, I had a friend who struggled severely with depression. She would always explain her deep distress in detail, yet she'd always say, "But Jesus." He was the silver lining to every difficulty. Jesus was her only hope. I didn't understand that. I always wondered about the significance of Jesus dying on the cross. People said he did it for us, for humankind. I didn't understand why his crucifixion should mean anything to me. How could he save me through that? Why didn't he save himself? What did I need saving from? How was the shedding of a stranger's blood going to save me? I saw his sacrifice as a physical one, not a spiritual one. I later realized Jesus was a spiritual sacrifice, put to physical death not by his own will, but by ours. A sacrifice offered before God because we didn't think we needed saving. We didn't recognize our Savior through our own blindness and ignorance. Through coming to know this stranger, Jesus, however, I came to know even greater things than I ever imagined for myself. When I was searching for colleges to attend, I attended a college fair, and as I drove back home with my best friend, I remember feeling as confused as ever, yet having this gut feeling that I was meant for something greater, feeling that it was waiting for me, that it was out there. Little did I know it was the Lord of Second Coming. He answered the questions and solved the issues no one else could. As I sought Jesus, he shared his story with me. He showed me greater things than I could imagine. Our eyes met, we smiled, and we laughed together. It took a while, though. I didn't always trust him. Life showed me I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. But day by day he became everything, the center of my universe, my only true love. It's now my life's greatest privilege and honor to know him and to put my trust in him. So now when I think of his life, when I read about his sacrifice, the way they spit on him, beat him, and mock him, even as it happens once again, I understand now why someone would willingly be sentenced, carry a daily cross, and drink a bitter cup they don't deserve. But salvation has never been about what we deserve. Salvation is for the kind and courageous. Love is a quiet force more powerful than violence. I understand that now. It is the misunderstood heroes who bear the burdens for all mankind. I understand how a stranger can save, even if we don't know we need saving, and how he can say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," even as they stone him. So I will lay down my life, since it was bought at a price to an owner who saw me broken and loved me anyway. I will not sell it to Satan. Every day I will be intentional. I will think of my physical freedom as the Lord's. There was always a love story waiting to be written. It was waiting for you and I. Now where despair died, a book of redemption lies. So every day I will use my voice without shame. I will tell the story, and they will know your name. They will know of your sacrifice. It won't be in vain.
Yes, I hope that everyone was able to gain a lot from her poem and realize that we have to truly go until the end, never losing our focus, our purpose, and most importantly, our love. So with that, I'll wrap up today's segment for 2G Talks. Again, I hope you liked Kat's poem, and again that you gained strength as we live together on this life of faith. If you have any questions or you would like to leave a comment, please do so, or feel free to shoot Eddie and I an email at 2gtalks@gmail.com. As always, don't forget to hit that like button, and I hope that you'll have a great rest of your Tuesday together with the Lord. I'll see y'all next week.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like